For 13 years, the town of Graywater Cove lived with a question no storm could wash away. What happened to Sheriff Harlan and Deputy Larkin the night they vanished into the fog? Locals said the sea took them. Others whispered darker things. But in the summer of 1975, a lone fisherman pulled something from the deep that turned legend into a haunting clue, and left behind a line no one can forget. The truth is deeper than the sea. The weathered trawler pitched violently against the surging tide, its wooden hull groaning in protest as Ray Dorsey gripped the wheel with calloused hands. Salt spray lashed his leathery face as he navigated the treacherous waters beneath Graywater Cove's notorious cliffs. 13 years of fishing these waters had taught him to respect their moods, but today the sea seemed particularly restless, as if guarding long-buried secrets. Ray squinted through the windshield, wiping away condensation with the back of his hand. The summer of 1975 had brought unusually calm seas, making this sudden squall all the more unexpected. His nets trailed behind the boat, heavy with the day's modest catch, barely enough to cover fuel costs, but better than returning empty-handed. A sudden jolt rocked the trawler. The nets had snagged on something substantial. Ray cut the engine, the sudden silence filled only by creaking wood and churning waves. He cursed under his breath, knowing that a torn net would cost him days of repair work. With practiced movements, he began the laborious process of hauling in the catch. "What in God's name?" he muttered as the winch strained against an unexpected weight. Through the churning foam, something solid and distinctly unnatural emerged, a shape too angular to be rock, too substantial to be driftwood. As water cascaded from its surface, Ray's breath caught in his throat. Beneath layers of algae and barnacles, unmistakable contours took shape. A vehicle's roof, the metal corroded by years of saltwater immersion. Ray's mind flashed back 13 years to a night when the radio at Marlene's Diner crackled with urgency. August 17, 1962. The night Sheriff Conrad Harlan and Deputy Paul Larkin vanished during a violent storm. "We're not alone out here." The sheriff's final transmission had cut to static, leaving only questions and whispers in its wake. With trembling hands, Ray secured his boat and dove into the churning waters. The current fought him, but decades at sea had made him strong. His fingers brushed against cold metal, finding purchase on what had once been a door handle. Through the murk, he made out faded lettering, Graywater Cove Sheriff. Inside the vehicle, embedded in the cracked dashboard, a tarnished badge caught what little light penetrated the depths. Ray's searching fingers found something else, a small metal box wedged beneath the passenger seat. He grabbed it and kicked toward the surface, breaking through with a desperate gasp. Back on his boat, he carefully opened the corroded box. Inside, protected from direct water exposure, was a folded piece of paper severely damaged, but with fragments still legible. "Deeper than the sea. Find Conrad, Cliffs." His hand shook as he reached for the radio. "Harbor Master, this is Mary Jane." His voice cracked with urgency. "I found something. I found them." If you enjoy fictional mysteries like this one, hit subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Let's uncover the truth together. Graywater Cove had changed since 1962, though not as much as its residents might have wished. The once thriving fishing village had weathered economic storms as fierce as any that battered its shores. The closure of the cannery 13 years ago had left deep scars, forcing many families to relocate in search of work. Those who remained clung to livelihoods increasingly strained by depleting fish stocks and rising costs. By mid-afternoon, a small crowd had gathered at the harbor as a salvage crane hoisted the rusted patrol car from Ray Dorsey's trawler. Water poured from the vehicle's shell, carrying with it 13 years of secrets back to the sea. The car's once gleaming paint was now a memory, replaced by rust and marine growth that transformed it into something almost organic. Sheriff Michael Larkin stood at the edge of the dock, hands jammed into the pockets of his uniform pants, face unreadable beneath the brim of his regulation hat. At 35, he carried the weight of his position with a solemn dignity that belied his relative youth. He had been just 22 when his older brother Paul disappeared, a rookie deputy himself, working the night desk when the radio call came in. Now he watched as divers secured cables to what remained of the patrol car, his brother's last known location. Michael's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of the emotion churning inside him. 13 years of following in Paul's footsteps, of living with unanswered questions, of bearing the weight of a legacy left unfinished. Quite the spectacle, isn't it? The voice beside him was cool, professional, with an undercurrent of something harder. Michael turned to face Eleanor Harlan, notepad in hand, her press credentials hanging around her neck. Conrad Harlan's daughter had her father's penetrating gaze, dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. At 30, she'd built a reputation as the town newspaper's most tenacious reporter, unafraid to ask difficult questions even when they made people uncomfortable. Eleanor, Michael acknowledged with a nod. Their relationship had always been complicated, two children orphaned by the same mysterious event, now adults with very different approaches to healing those wounds. Care to comment on this development, Sheriff? Her pen hovered over her pad, professional despite the personal stakes. Not now, Eleanor. Let's at least see what we're dealing with first. The crane groaned as it lifted the car onto the dock. Water and mud sluiced from the rusted frame, pooling on weathered planks. From the gathered crowd, a collective gasp rose as the vehicle settled with a metallic groan. Dr. Vivian Reed, the town's physician, approached wearing rubber gloves. At 63, she'd been one of the first responders during the initial search 13 years ago. Now her experienced eyes scanned the wreckage methodically. No remains immediately visible, she noted, peering through the empty frame where the windshield had once been. But there's something here. Her gloved hand reached carefully into the ruined dashboard, extracting a corroded metal object, Sheriff Harlan's badge. Mayor Richard Blackwood arrived, his usual confident stride faltering slightly as he approached the gathering. At 57, he cut an imposing figure, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, even for this impromptu visit to the harbor. He'd been a town councilman when the disappearance occurred, ascending to mayor just 2 years later on promises of economic revitalization. "My God," he murmured, staring at the wreckage. "After all this time." Ray Dorsey hovered at the edge of the proceedings, his weather-beaten face troubled. He kept rubbing his hands on his pants as if trying to remove an invisible stain, eyes darting between the car and the gathering officials. Dr. Reed continued her examination, extracting from beneath the passenger seat a rusted service revolver and the small metal box Ray had resealed after his discovery. There's what appears to be a service weapon under the passenger seat, and this waterproof evidence box, standard issue for officers in that era. The contents are water-damaged but somewhat protected. Michael moved forward, crouching beside the car. "That would be my brother's gun," he said quietly. "He always kept it under the seat, against regulations. Dad used to get on him about it." Eleanor scribbled furiously in her notebook, but her professional demeanor slipped momentarily as Dr. Reed carefully opened the metal box. "Paper inside, severely degraded but partially legible," Dr. Reed reported, extracting a fragile sheet with tweezers. "Most of it's just pulp now, but there are still some readable fragments." "What does it say?" someone called from the crowd. Dr. Reed squinted at the page, then read the few legible words. "Deeper than the sea, find Conrad, cliffs." The rest is illegible. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Old wounds reopened as speculation began anew. "What do you think happened to Sheriff Harlan and Deputy Larkin?" Share your theories in the comments below. The old photograph spread across Michael's desk showed a different Greywater Cove, one with a bustling cannery, fishing boats 3 deep at the harbor, and streets filled with purpose. Among them, a stern-faced Conrad Harlan stared back at the camera, his sheriff's badge gleaming, his posture military straight, despite the slight limp he'd brought home from Korea. Michael studied his brother's mentor, a man who'd cast a long shadow over Greywater Cove. Conrad had returned from war changed, according to those who knew him before. The easy smile of his youth replaced by watchful eyes and a rigid sense of duty. He'd followed his own father into law enforcement, taking the sheriff's badge with a solemn vow to protect the town that had raised him. A knock on the door interrupted Michael's reminiscence. Eleanor Harlan stood in the doorway, notepad conspicuously absent, her professional demeanor softened by the late hour. "Thought you might still be here," she said, stepping into the office without waiting for an invitation. "Old habits." Michael gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Can't sleep. Figured I might as well be productive." "Looking for answers in old pictures?" She picked up a photo of their fathers, Conrad and James Larkin, standing on a fishing boat, young and carefree before war, and tragedy shaped them into the men they would become. "Looking for questions I haven't thought to ask yet," Michael corrected, leaning back in his chair. "The official report from '62 is full of holes. Half the witness statements contradict each other, and key evidence went missing before the state police even arrived." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "The newspaper archives from that period are suspiciously incomplete too, whole weeks missing from the bound collections. Someone didn't want the full story told, or preserved." Eleanor hesitated, then reached into her bag. "That's actually why I'm here. I found this in my father's desk years ago, never showed it to anyone." She placed a small leather-bound notebook on the desk. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. "Dad's personal case notes," she explained. "He kept them separate from the official records, said you could never be too careful about who might be reading over your shoulder in a small town." Michael opened the notebook carefully, recognizing Conrad's precise handwriting. Dates, times, observations. Not a formal log, but a personal record of concerns and suspicions. "He was investigating something in the weeks before they disappeared," Eleanor continued. "Something he didn't trust to the official reports." Michael flipped through the pages, stopping at entries from early August 1962. August 3rd, third shipment this month. B family involvement now certain. Need more evidence before confronting counsel. August 7th, PL acting strangely. Mentioned financial troubles again. Need to watch carefully. August 10th, spotted unfamiliar boat offshore near caves. No registration visible. Elijah reports lights on cliff path after midnight. August 15th, cannot trust department channels. Too many ears. Will take matters directly to state police after confirming details with E. The final entry, dated August 17th, was incomplete. Meeting informant tonight. If information checks out, this goes beyond simple smuggling. The implications for the town would be... The sentence remained unfinished. "He never got to complete it," Eleanor said softly. "They disappeared that night." Michael looked up, meeting her eyes. "You've had this for years. Why show me now?" "Because now we have the car. Now there's a chance to find actual answers, not just theories." She hesitated. "And because I'm not sure who else to trust." The following morning, Michael called Officer Jenkins, now retired, to the station. At 72, Jenkins moved slowly, arthritis stiffening the hands that had once managed the department's radio dispatch with nimble efficiency. "You were on duty the night they disappeared," Michael began, once they were seated in his office. Jenkins nodded, his rheumy eyes distant with memory. "Nasty storm that night. Power was in and out all over town." "I need you to tell me exactly what you heard in that final transmission." The official report says Sheriff Harlan only got out, "We're not alone out here," before the radio cut off. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably. That's what the report says. But is that what you heard? The old man's gaze dropped to his gnarled hands. Son, it was 13 years ago, in the middle of a storm. You were the last person to hear my brother's voice, Michael pressed. The last person to hear Sheriff Harlan alive. I think you remember exactly what was said. Jenkins was silent for a long moment. The radio log went missing the next day, he finally said. Someone took it from my desk while I was helping coordinate the search parties. What did the log contain? The full transmission. Jenkins looked up, his eyes suddenly clear. Conrad said, "We're not alone out here. They're following us. It's Blackwood." He paused. Then there was a sound, like tires skidding. Then nothing. Michael felt his pulse quicken. Blackwood? As in Mayor Richard Blackwood. His father, most likely. Victor Blackwood was on the town council then. Owned the shipping company that took over when the cannery closed. Jenkins leaned forward. The next day, when I came in to show the log to the state police, it was gone. And Victor Blackwood was sitting in your chair telling me there'd been misunderstandings about what was heard over the radio. Meanwhile, Eleanor visited the lighthouse where Elijah Harper, now 84, lived in retirement. The ancient structure had been decommissioned in 1968, replaced by an automated beacon. But Elijah had remained, serving as caretaker and tour guide for the occasional summer visitors. I remember that night like it was yesterday, the old man told her, his voice thin but his memory sharp. The storm came up sudden-like. 1 minute clear skies, next minute all hell breaking loose. You called the sheriff's office, Eleanor prompted, about headlights near the cliff. Elijah nodded, pointing through the window toward a stretch of coastline. Right there, where the road curves close to the edge, had been washed out some in previous storms, was supposed to be closed off. He squinted at the distant curve, saw headlights there moving slow, then another set following behind. 2 vehicles, Eleanor clarified, surprised. Yep, called it in because nobody should have been out there. Road was dangerous. He turned to face her, eyes suddenly intense. But that wasn't all I saw that week. He led her to a small desk where he kept a leather-bound logbook. Lighthouse keeper's duty to record unusual activities, maritime law. He flipped through pages yellow with age. Week before they vanished, I saw boats. Coming in at night, no running lights, meeting up with smaller boats from shore. Eleanor leaned closer, recognizing the dates that corresponded with her father's notes. Did you tell my father about this? Course I did. That's why he was out that night. Said he needed to see for himself. Back at the town garage, forensic technicians from the state police carefully examined the rusted patrol car. Years of saltwater immersion had destroyed most potential evidence, but the vehicle itself told a story. Impact damage to the front end, the lead technician reported to Michael. Consistent with hitting another vehicle or possibly a tree, but there's also this. He pointed to several small holes in the passenger side door, bullet holes, at least 3, from the outside in. Michael's throat tightened. They were shot at. Looks that way, and there's something else. The technician reached into a plastic evidence bag. We found this wedged under the floor mat. Water damage is extensive, but you can still make out part of the image. Michael took the bag, holding it up to the light. Inside was a waterlogged photograph, most of the image destroyed by seawater. Only a small corner remained partially intact, showing what appeared to be wooden crates being unloaded from a boat. The name painted on the boat's hull was partially visible. Wood Ent, Blackwood Enterprises. That evening, as Michael reviewed the mounting evidence in his office, he found a plain envelope that had been slid under his door. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing the typewritten message, "Some secrets should stay underwater." If you're captivated by mysteries like this one, be sure to hit subscribe and leave us a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Summer storms in Graywater Cove always carried echoes of that night in 1962. As thunder rolled across the darkening sky, Michael Larkin sat in his patrol car overlooking the same stretch of coastal road where his brother had vanished. Rain pelted the windshield, blurring the view of churning waves below. The car radio crackled. "Sheriff, this is dispatch. Ms. Harlan is asking if you can meet her at the old cannery. Says it's urgent." "Tell her I'm on my way," Michael responded, starting the engine. The abandoned cannery stood at the edge of town, its skeleton of rusted metal and weathered wood, a monument to Graywater Cove's economic decline. Once the town's largest employer, it had closed abruptly in early 1962, throwing hundreds out of work. Victor Blackwood had purchased the property for a fraction of its value, using it for storage, while his shipping company flourished. Eleanor waited by the main entrance, sheltered from the rain beneath a sagging overhang. Her expression was tense, excited. "What's so urgent?" Michael asked, joining her. "I interviewed Angela Blackwood," Eleanor explained. "Richard's sister. She's been a recluse for years, living in that old mansion on the hill, but something about finding the car made her agree to talk." Angela Blackwood had once been engaged to Paul Larkin, a relationship that had ended abruptly weeks before his disappearance. What did she say? Not much directly, kept talking in circles about sacrifices made for the greater good and how some secrets protect more than they harm. Eleanor's eyes gleamed with the excitement of a reporter on the scent of a story. "But she gave me this." She held up an old iron key. "Said if I wanted to understand, I should look where the town's lifeblood once flowed, but now only ghosts remain." "The cannery?" "Exactly. And look at this." Eleanor pointed to faded lettering above a rusted door. "Authorized personnel only, shipping and receiving." The key turned with difficulty in the weathered lock, but eventually the door groaned open. Inside, emergency flashlights revealed a large room filled with dust and forgotten equipment. Eleanor moved deeper into the space, her flashlight beam dancing across abandoned machinery. "There must be something here," she muttered. "Something worth keeping locked up after all these years." Michael examined the walls, noting a section that seemed newer than the rest. "Here," he called. "This concrete's different." Closer inspection revealed a hairline crack, outlining what appeared to be a door. Michael pushed experimentally, feeling it give slightly. "There's a space behind this," he said, excitement building. "Help me look for a release mechanism." They searched the wall meticulously, finally discovering a hidden lever disguised as a broken pipe fixture. When pulled, the false wall swung inward with a groan of disused hinges. Beyond lay a narrow corridor sloping downward into darkness. "It goes under the building," Eleanor whispered, "toward the water." The passage extended nearly 200 feet, eventually opening into a cavern where the sea had eroded the shoreline beneath the cannery. Here, a wooden dock extended into a sheltered pool, a hidden harbor, invisible from outside, accessible only through this secret passage or by water through a narrow opening in the cliff face. "My God," Michael breathed. "The perfect smuggling operation. Boats could come in through that gap in the rocks, unload without anyone seeing from shore or sea." Eleanor's flashlight illuminated the walls where shelving had been built. Most stood empty, but a few contained rotting wooden crates. She pried one open, revealing empty spaces where bottles had once rested. "Alcohol?" she guessed. Maybe initially. Michael had opened another crate, finding decayed packaging material and a single tarnished metal container. Inside were traces of white powder. "But I'm betting they graduated to more profitable contraband." In the far corner, they discovered a small office area. Though water damage had destroyed most of the contents, a metal filing cabinet yielded partial records, shipping manifests with coded entries, financial ledgers showing substantial payments to initials that corresponded with several prominent Graywater Cove citizens. CM is Charles Miller, who was deputy mayor back then, Eleanor noted, scanning the documents. TW, probably Thomas Wilson, the bank manager. Michael found a folder labeled Simply Problems. Inside was a list of names, people who had asked too many questions or noticed suspicious activities. Conrad Harlan's name was circled in red. Next to it was written, Becoming Dangerous, Knows Too Much, Handle Before State Involvement. They were planning to silence him, Eleanor whispered, her face pale in the flashlight's glow. As they continued searching, a noise from the tunnel entrance startled them. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. Someone's coming, Michael whispered, drawing his service weapon. They retreated behind a stack of crates as the footsteps grew closer. A beam of light swept the cavern, finally settling on their hiding place. "I know you're in here," called a familiar voice. "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be." Mayor Richard Blackwood stepped into view, rainwater dripping from his expensive coat. He held no weapon, but his face was set in grim determination. "I always knew someone would find this place eventually," he said, his voice echoing in the cavern. "Though I'd hoped the sea would have claimed more of it by now." Michael stood, keeping his weapon trained on the mayor. "Richard Blackwood, you're interfering with an official investigation." The mayor's eyes narrowed. "Lower your weapon, Sheriff. You don't understand what you're dealing with." "I understand enough," Michael replied coldly. "I understand why Conrad Harlan and my brother disappeared. They discovered your family's smuggling operation." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "This goes deeper than you realize. Put that gun away before you make things worse for yourself." Eleanor emerged from behind the crates. "Why should we trust anything you say? Your family is responsible for the deaths of our fathers." "Is that what you think?" Blackwood laughed, a hollow sound without humor. "You're still missing half the puzzle." "Then enlighten us," Michael challenged, his weapon steady. Blackwood seemed to calculate his options, then sighed heavily. "Your brother was no innocent victim, Sheriff." Michael's finger tightened slightly on the trigger. "Watch what you say next very carefully." "Paul was in love with my sister Angela," Blackwood continued, undeterred, "wanted to marry her, give her the life she deserved. But a deputy's salary wouldn't support the lifestyle she was accustomed to, especially with your mother's medical bills." Michael's jaw tightened at the mention of his mother's long illness, the cancer that had drained their family savings and eventually taken her life just a year after Paul's disappearance. "My father offered Paul a simple arrangement: look the other way occasionally, warn us about potential raids or inspections. In return, enough money to solve his problems." Blackwood's expression grew distant. Paul agreed reluctantly at first, but once started down that path. "You're lying," Michael growled. "My brother would never—" "Your brother was human," Blackwood interrupted, "with human weaknesses and desires. He wanted to care for your mother, to build a future with Angela. He told himself it was victimless crime, that no one was really getting hurt." Eleanor's voice was cold. "And my father? What was his weakness?" "Conrad had none, which made him dangerous. He started noticing irregularities, shipments that didn't match manifests, patrol schedules that mysteriously changed, money flowing into town from unclear sources." Blackwood shook his head. "When he began investigating, Paul tried to distract him, misdirect him, but Conrad was too good a sheriff." "What happened that night?" Michael demanded. "August 17th, 1962. Blackwood's voice dropped lower. "A shipment was coming in, the largest yet. Paul was supposed to ensure the coastal road remained clear. Instead, he broke down and confessed everything to Conrad." In the silence that followed, they could hear water dripping somewhere in the cavern, a steady rhythm like a metronome, counting out seconds of truth. Conrad was furious, betrayed. They argued in the patrol car, heading toward this very location to catch the shipment in progress. My father had men watching the road. When they reported the patrol car approaching, he ordered them to stop it at all costs. Eleanor's voice shook slightly. They shot at the car. Blackwood nodded. Trying to disable it, not kill anyone. But the road was treacherous, the storm violent. The car went over the edge. His shoulders sagged with the weight of memory. By the time our men reached the bottom, the tide was already pulling the car out. Conrad was gone, thrown from the vehicle during the crash, presumably drowned. But Paul? Was my brother alive? Michael asked, his voice barely audible over the storm outside. Injured, but alive, begging forgiveness, saying he never meant for anyone to get hurt. Blackwood met Michael's gaze. My father had a choice to make. A dead sheriff was already a catastrophe. A living, talking deputy who could implicate half the town's leadership would destroy Graywater Cove completely. The implication hung in the air like poison. You killed him, Eleanor whispered. My father made a decision he believed was for the greater good. The town was suffering. The smuggling operation was bringing in money, creating jobs indirectly. One man's life weighed against an entire community's survival. Blackwood spread his hands. I'm not defending his choice. I'm simply telling you what happened. Michael's weapon had lowered slightly as the story unfolded. Where is he buried? There's an unmarked grave on my family's property, behind the old garden shed. Lightning flashed through the cavern's sea entrance, momentarily illuminating all three figures in stark relief, Michael with his service weapon, Eleanor with tears streaming down her face, and Mayor Blackwood standing alone, the weight of inherited sins visible in his posture. The mystery deepens. What do you think happened to Sheriff Harlan? Hit like if you think you figured it out. Dawn broke over Graywater Cove, painting the cliffs in golden light that belied the darkness of the previous night's revelations. The storm had passed, leaving behind washed-clean streets and a fragile sense of clarity. In the sheriff's office, Michael Larkin sat across from State Police Captain Roberts, who had arrived with a team of investigators following Michael's early morning call. Let me make sure I understand, Roberts said, reviewing his notes. Mayor Blackwood has confessed to knowledge of events surrounding the deaths of Sheriff Harlan and Deputy Larkin in 1962, implicating his deceased father in what amounts to conspiracy, smuggling, obstruction of justice, and homicide. That's correct, Michael confirmed. He's provided a full statement and is cooperating. The remains we believe to be my brother's are being exhumed from the location he indicated on the Blackwood estate. Captain Roberts studied Michael carefully. This must be difficult for you. Michael's expression remained professional, though the shadows under his eyes spoke of a sleepless night. I've been searching for the truth for 13 years, Captain. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it. Across town, Eleanor Harlan stood at the edge of the cliffs, watching as forensic teams carefully worked their way down the treacherous slope to where the patrol car had ultimately been found. The tide was out, revealing a small rocky beach typically submerged except during the lowest tides. We've found something, called one of the technicians, waving Eleanor closer. In a crevice between two large rocks, protected from the worst of the ocean's force, lay a weathered leather wallet. The technician carefully placed it in an evidence bag. It's too deteriorated to open here, he explained, but there appears to be identification inside. Eleanor nodded numbly, wondering if she was looking at her father's last personal effects, carried from his pocket by ocean currents to rest here, waiting 13 years to be discovered. At the small cemetery behind the town's church, a solemn process was underway. Under the supervision of state medical examiners, a grave was being opened on the Blackwood property, a simple marker bearing only the date, August 17, 1962. Michael stood at a distance, watching as the earth was carefully removed. Eleanor appeared beside him, her reporter's notebook absent, her presence purely personal. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. "I don't know yet," he admitted. Part of me has been preparing for this moment for 13 years. Another part never really believed it would come." Eleanor nodded in understanding. "I found myself looking at old pictures of Dad this morning, trying to reconcile the father I knew with the sheriff in Conrad's notebook, the one who saw corruption and stood against it, even when it cost him everything. They were both good men who found themselves in an impossible situation," Michael said after a moment. "Paul made a terrible mistake, but in the end, he tried to make it right. By confessing to my father. Who could have arrested him, ruined him? Instead, they were heading to gather evidence together, to fix things." Michael's voice caught slightly. "That counts for something." Their contemplation was interrupted as one of the medical examiners approached. "Sheriff Larkin, we've completed the exhumation." "And?" Michael's voice was steady, professional, though his hands trembled slightly at his sides. "The remains are consistent with a male in his mid-20s. There's evidence of trauma, a gunshot wound to the chest that would have been fatal." The examiner hesitated. "However, there's something unusual." "What's that?" Eleanor asked. "The remains aren't complete. The right arm is missing entirely, and there are other inconsistencies that suggest the body may have been disturbed sometime after burial." Michael frowned. "Disturbed? How?" "It's impossible to say with certainty after all this time, but someone appears to have reopened this grave within a few years of the original burial." The implication hung in the air. Someone had returned to Paul Larkin's grave after his secret burial. That evening, as the sun set over the ocean, Michael received a call from the forensic lab. "Sheriff, we've processed the contents of the wallet found at the cliff site," the technician reported. "Most was destroyed by water exposure, but we found something unusual, a folded piece of paper sealed in a small plastic evidence bag within a hidden compartment." "What does it say?" Michael asked, heart quickening. "It's only partly legible, but it appears to be a note. Conrad alive. Ray knows. Witness protection." Michael's mind raced. Ray Dorsey, the fisherman who had discovered the car, the man who'd been acting strangely ever since, as if carrying a burden he couldn't put down. Who better to help someone disappear than a man with a boat and knowledge of isolated coastal inlets? He called Eleanor immediately. "Meet me at Ray's place. I think my brother left us a message, and your father might still be alive." Ray Dorsey lived in a small cottage overlooking the harbor. When Michael and Eleanor arrived, they found the door ajar, the interior dark. "Ray," Michael called, drawing his weapon cautiously. No answer. They moved through the silent house, finding no sign of the fisherman until they reached the small back room he used as an office. There, pinned to a corkboard, was a nautical chart with a small red X marked on a remote stretch of coastline some 20 miles north of Graywater Cove. Beside it hung a faded photograph of a bearded man standing on a dock. Though the image was years old, the eyes were unmistakable, Conrad Harlan's eyes, staring back at them from a face that had aged but not been forgotten. On the back, written in faded ink, "The truth is deeper than the sea." "He's alive," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "All this time." "And Ray helped him disappear," Michael added, the pieces finally falling into place. "That's why he found the car now. He knew exactly where it was all along." A note lay on Ray's desk, addressed to both of them, Michael and Eleanor. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone, taking Conrad to a new safe location. He never died that night. When the car went over, he was thrown clear. I found him injured on the rocks while running my boat close to shore during the storm. Victor Blackwood's men were searching the beach, so I hid Conrad on my boat and later helped him disappear. Conrad feared for both your lives if he returned. Victor had already killed Paul and controlled too many powerful people in town. He's been living under a new name in a fishing village up north all these years. I planted his message in the patrol car 3 years ago when the currents finally shifted enough for me to reach it. I knew eventually it would be found, and the truth with it. The truth is deeper than the sea. That was Conrad's way of saying that What happened that night was more complex than anyone knew. Paul died trying to make things right. Conrad lived protecting the town the only way he could, by staying dead. Check the locked box under my bed. You'll find everything you need. Beneath Ray's bed, they found a strong box containing detailed records Conrad had compiled before his disappearance, along with a journal he'd maintained during his years in exile. Most shocking was a series of photographs documenting Victor Blackwood's men returning to Paul's grave months after his death, apparently to retrieve something buried with the body. The final entry in Conrad's journal, dated just 2 weeks earlier, read, "Ray tells me the currents have changed. The car may be found soon. After 13 years, perhaps it's time for the truth to surface with it. I've lived half a life, watching my daughter from afar, unable to hold her or guide her." If this reaches you, Eleanor, know that not a day passed when I didn't think of you. The truth is deeper than the sea, but a father's love is deeper still. 3 days later, a small boat docked at a remote pier 50 miles up the coast. A silver-haired man embraced his daughter for the first time in 13 years, while nearby, Michael Larkin watched with tears in his eyes, clutching his brother's recovered badge. Some truths may sink beneath the waves for a time, but eventually, inevitably, they find their way back to the light. What do you think happened to Sheriff Harlan? Did he survive? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.